I end up talking, I either have 2 or 4. So, you know, I'm always impressed with a public servant that sits in the back of the room, and that's Dave Daniels, who's sitting in the back there, our state senator. So you can give him a round of applause. Okay, so I guess we'll take a few questions from the press, and we'll go back to work.
Not from the family, though, Governor.
No questions. No.
Will Ohio be ready to restart executions next month, or do you anticipate seeking a delay because of the shortage of the lethal injection drug?
As one of the briefing documents that I prepared, and quite frankly haven't executed on until today, is to look at that exact issue. I understand that we will be, but that's obviously has to be a top priority to make sure we are ready. So we will know that very soon. I will know that very soon.
What about privately run prisons? Are we likely to see more privately run prisons, more contract services than we currently do? And can you go to the mic when you answer it for me, please?
Well, let me answer. Yeah, it is our goal, you know, and I've said all along that everything is on the table. We have 2 prisons in Ohio that are currently being operated by private companies, but they're owned by the state. The idea that there are more of those operations that can be operated privately is absolutely something that we are aggressively reviewing as we get closer to the March budget deadline. And then secondly, the ability to actually build and operate private prisons is something we have to look at. Now, Gary said something, you know what, I'll tell you something, we've got some really good quality people in this cabinet. You know, it just takes me back to think about the guy that we appointed the head of the EPA, Pat Nally, and the way he was able to talk about the permits, the need to get them through, the need to be, I mean, he's informing me on a lot of things. And as Gary said, you know, the most dangerous people in our state are people that we want to control. We don't want to put that in a situation where that's privatized, but there's so much else that can be done. And this is like a $3.5 billion budget. This is an enormous operation. You know, tremendous number of staff. And look, Gary's, I'm not an expert in the prisons, but I don't think that anybody has figured this out in the country. And the idea of privatizing more systems, the idea of having private prisons, Gary also points out, and I'll let him speak for himself here in a moment, is, you know, the type of personnel that are needed in the prisons are reduced when you're able to privatize. So we clearly are going to look at this, but everything, it won't be privatized, but you will see more things that are going to be operated by private companies, which is exactly why I said the fact that he works for CCA. You know, there'll be times when we'll make decisions where, you know, he won't be able to be involved, and you'll have to know that, and we will make sure that you know that, so there are no conflicts. Gary?
Yeah, I think the best answer to almost anything that's complex is a mixture and a balance, and I will tell you that I think there will be a balance. As we take a look at the cost in our prison, 68 to 70% of our budget, this $3.5 billion budget, is paid to staff, for staff wages, benefits, and overtime. And I think the more we can make that efficient, and I think the private sector has some mechanisms and has demonstrated some ways to do that. So I think we need to learn from them, and in some cases we may need to take a look at whether they are a better option in certain locations for certain types of inmates than we have. So we're going to explore that, and it's going to be very open, and as we talk about, I would expect fully that we are going to ask people, and we've already started that, ideas and ways to make that more effective. So I think that we're certainly going to explore that.
You know, and I'll also say, I know that Senator Seitz has a sentencing reform bill, which we will also deal with. I said to Gary, I said, you know, we don't want to have people who are not a threat to the public be put in a prison where they could become, their situation gets worse, okay, and they become a greater danger to us. So who should be in who should we let out? It's not who we should let out, it's who we should put in. And so we are going to carefully look at sentencing reform. It's important that we do. And I know that I want to encourage the activities of the legislature. We intend to incorporate pieces of what they're doing as we move forward and have a comprehensive program to better manage what we have in a traditional way, to think about the ability to privatize more services, the possibility of developing more prisons, and we have a few other things that we're thinking about that I'm not prepared to get into today, including sentencing reform. So I think the public would say, as long as we're safe, don't force us to spend a fortune when we don't have to, particularly if we end up in a situation where we've made it more difficult for people to get out and get back to a normal life.
So are you planning to incorporate elements of sentencing reform into your budget bill, or are you looking at a separate sentencing reform bill?
I would expect that you would see. Let me say, I've got a meeting with some of the leaders tomorrow, and I should not get into all that, but obviously it's something that we're going to think about, Marcus. You almost got me to give you a straight answer on something.
Governor, are there limits to what a private prison can do? Is a private prison appropriate for the worst of the worst, death row, for instance?
I would not anticipate in Ohio that happening, although around the country they do have some private operators do handle some very, very serious maximum security threat group types. So it does exist. That's certainly not my priority.
Can you talk about, I know today it's very timely because of the situation in Knox County, can you talk about the difference in cost between pursuing the death penalty for a convicted murderer versus putting them in prison for life? And are we likely to see veering away from the death penalty to save money?
Absolutely not. You don't make a decision on, first of all, those decisions are being made by judges and juries. But the idea, I mean, look, I voted on the death penalty when I was 26, 27 years old, a member of the legislature. These are, this is a very big deal when you talk about the fact that you're going to execute somebody, and costs are never an issue. That's not any single thing that we'd ever think about.
You mentioned transparency before. Are there any concerns about revolving door here, sort of the other way, coming from the private sector into public? And how specifically will you deal with, the state's dealings with CCA? They would stand to be involved, I would imagine, if we are looking at privatization.
Well, thank God we're getting people to come from the private sector where they know, sort of modern 21st century approaches into the public sector. And it's a big deal because he'll have a revolving door problem once he decides that that we're going home. We're not going to do this anymore. So what we say is, if now that he's going to come in, if he's in the public sector for 1 hour, he's not allowed to go back and deal in the private sector with anything dealing with the state of Ohio for a year. Now, I think we want more private sector people coming into government and running government in an efficient and effective and modern way. So I'm absolutely thrilled with a number of people that we have, Mark, who are giving up private sector privacy, benefits, pay to come and be a public servant. I mean, I was worried about whether we would get the best of the best, and some of the best we're not going to get, frankly, because they're making a lot more money. I mean, and they don't have to deal with loss of privacy. And but in this case, I'm just so excited we have somebody who's just not been a lifetime bureaucrat in a system that needs fresh eyes. So the beautiful thing about this is he's been in the public sector with enormous experience, but he's been in the private sector now with significant experience. Take the best of both worlds, meld them together, and so we've seen a number of people who have come out of the private sector, and if you ask them, why do you want to do it, they tell me, because I think this represents real change in this administration. You want to have a word to echo that so I sound like really good?
You've spent a lot of time with me here lately. I mean, it's true. And it is true. I mean, life is too short not to love what you do and to make a difference. And that's been, I guess, my motto. And I want to address the specific question about CCA very clearly. I will tell you this, I spent a lot of time in my briefings with the Ethics Commission before I accepted this position. And when we do business, when the Department of Corrections does business, whether it's with CCA or anyone else, it will be publicly bid, it will be public, there will be total visibility on that proposal. And when it comes down to the selection process, if it in fact does involve them, I will recuse myself from that role. But we have to look at best options to take care of services that right now are daunting when it comes to their significance and their budget impact.
You know, and I just want to stress that one more time, because, you know, we've been all going back and forth. Folks